A.M. Rosenthal makes a speech at a convocation honoring the memory of Elijah Parrish Lovejoy. Let me tell you a little true story about how a reporter I knew operated. Every day he would go out and cover his beat the best way he knew and the only way he knew, by talking to people in the town about what concerned them, about the cost of living, about the feel of life, about what they thought about their leaders, about politics. Every night that reporter went home, wrote a story, and then carefully burned his notes or flushed them down the toilet. It was a pity, because he might forget what he couldn't write the day if he burned his notes. But he also knew the police had permission to search his files any time. A lot of people did not want to talk to the reporter because they felt he might reveal their names on purpose or through a slip of the typewriter. They were defenseless people, and they were afraid. The reporter never urged them to talk because he understood their fear. Others, however, did talk to the reporter, precisely because they felt powerless and wanted somebody to tell the truth they knew. They accepted his word that he would suffer imprisonment before telling their names. The government became very annoyed at this reporter. They questioned him directly about his sources, and, of course, he did not respond. They bugged his home and followed him wherever he went, and they searched his office and tracked his phone calls. Finally, the government got really angry and said, "You can't write about us anymore. You can't have access. Go away." But some of the people about whom he had written, and whose names he had never released, kissed him when he went away and gave him roses, and everybody said he was a hero, and later he was loaded with honors. I was the reporter, and the beat I covered was Communist Poland. That was the first time I had to operate worrying about the police and courts, and the first time I had to burn notes and think about going to jail. I thought it would be the last, because I resolved never again to work in a totalitarian society. Now it is 20 years later, and I am the editor of the same newspaper for which I was a reporter in Poland. I spent my time dealing with news and with staff matters. There is one subject that now takes up a considerable amount of my time and thoughts that has to do with whether reporters should burn their notes, whether they are going to go to jail, what are the possibilities of a sudden police search, whether people who once talked to us will talk anymore, whether other papers can be fined out of existence, whether the police will secretly commandeer our phone records to find our sources of information, whether we will be allowed to cover the administration of justice, how to get the police to reveal necessary information. New York, not Warsaw. I do tell you all this to imply that we have gone totalitarian or the Republic will fall. I do not tell you all this to imply that we have gone totalitarian or that the Republic will fall, but I do tell you that the process essential to a free press, one of the institutions that will help guarantee that we do not go totalitarian, that the Republic will not fall, is under attack, and not from our enemies or the enemies of freedom. That we could handle. No, it is under attack from some of the very people whose professions have helped create and strengthen a free press, some of the lawyers and judges of our country. Honorable men and women who traditionally have been the philosophic allies of the free press. And it is under attack from federal legislators and politicians who certainly do not see themselves as enemies of a free press. They just think the American press is a little too free for their tastes. They want to prevent the press from printing certain kinds of information. They say that obviously this does not affect such respected newspapers as the Times or the Washington Post or the Boston Globe. All they are aiming at, they say, is certain nasty fringe publications. Now, I happen to agree that some of the targets are indeed nasty and fringe, but it is precisely the fringes, not just the center, that the First Amendment was designed to protect. Simply see what has happened in the past few years. A dozen or so reporters and editors have been sent to jail for no other crime than trying to protect their sources. Exactly what I did in Poland, every day, and for which Americans praised me. Others are now under orders to reveal sources or face jail. The courts have permitted newsrooms to be searched. Thousands of memoranda and files have been subpoenaed in different actions around the country. One large newspaper, our own, has been fined hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now every small newspaper lives under the threat of being fined into bankruptcy at the decision of a judge. Laws erected by state governments to protect the reporter's right to work freely have been destroyed by some courts. Many judges have decided that reporters can be barred from essential parts of the court process pretrial hearings, which constitute so important a part of the administration of justice. Other courts have placed severe restraints on participants in the judicial process, preventing press and public from finding out what is going on. A wall of judicial protection has been built around information held by the police behind which they can operate in relative secrecy. In more and more cases, courts have upheld the principle of prior restraint, that is, preventing the press from publishing what it feels should be published. Until a few years ago, this was unthinkable. And in case after case, by demanding notes and files and sending reporters to jail for not revealing sources, courts in effect have ruled that they have the power to enforce publication of what reporters and editors feel should not be published. And in case after case, by demanding notes and files and sending reporters to jail for not revealing sources, courts in effect have ruled that they have the power to enforce publication of what reporters and editors feel should not be published, because the information is either confidential or simply inaccurate, untrustworthy or damaging to innocent people, just raw material. In totality, courts now have ruled themselves overseers of essential decision-making processes of the free press that the First Amendment was designed to safeguard from government encroachment. What to publish, when to publish, how to operate, what to think. I do not think there is a plot against the press on the part of the courts. I do think that there is a resentment against the press that comes from many things. I do feel that most of the resentment comes from the virtues rather than the failures of the press, the unpleasant virtues of telling the people the truth about Vietnam, Watergate, corruption in government, or in business, the aggressiveness and cantankerousness which are part of our makeup and function. We annoy the hell out of people, and we have our faults. By God, we have our faults. There are scores of publications I wouldn't read, let alone work for, and there are a few for which I have loathing and contempt. But there is a difference between resenting the process or even loathing it and trying to control it. The First Amendment was written not to protect the press from the admiration of government, but from the loathing of government, all branches of government. Courts and the press are involved, it seems to me, in two philosophic differences. One is that some judges feel that it is incumbent upon them to protect what the government says for the national security of the United States. National security usually turns out to be a matter of political or diplomatic interest, or plain embarrassment. The price of prior restraint, a fancy way of saying judicial censorship, strikes me as a very expensive price indeed to pay to save government face. Remember what the government said would happen if we published the Pentagon Papers? National calamity, revelation of state secrets, disaster upon disaster. The government position was a fraud, and the government, I believe, knew it. As Judge Harold Medina once put it, any judge who knows his business and who has a stiff backbone can afford a fair trial without any invasion of the freedom of the press. In that speech of his, Judge Medina landed it pretty heavily on judges who he thought violated the First Amendment. He also laid it pretty heavily on reporters and editors and publishers who were too quick to compromise. He gave them a piece of advice: fight like hell every inch of the way. Well, we are fighting, and it seems that almost every time we turn around, there is a new battle to be fought. One had to do with the seizure of the telephone records of our Atlanta bureau by the Department of Justice. They were not investigating us. They were investigating the Ku Klux Klan, which we also had been investigating without informing us or giving us a chance to fight. Southern Bell bowed to a subpoena of the Department of Justice and turned over all the records from our Atlanta bureau and from the home of our bureau chief. The purpose of the subpoena was to find out who our reporters were talking to. This clandestine investigation of a reporter's work is a clear violation of the spirit of the First Amendment. I'm happy to say that a particular threat has been considerably eased. Because of complaints from the press and the bar, the Justice Department issued new guidelines that made unnotified seizure much less likely. The press is not asking for privilege. That word implies some special gift to be bestowed upon the press or withheld from the press at somebody's discretion, a judge's or a legislator's or a policeman's. No, we are not talking about the privilege of the press, but the right and ability and duty of the press to function in any meaningful sense. Yes, this all concerns editors, reporters, and publishers, But I beseech you to consider that this concerns each of you as citizens of a country based on freedom of thought and expression. Every individual American has to ask herself or himself some questions. Do you want a society in which newspapers have to operate under the fear of being fined to death? Do you want a society in which newspaper offices can be searched without advanced hearings? Do you want a society in which the public does not know what is taking place in vital parts of the court processes? Do you want a society in which the police process is made virtually secret? Do you want a society that is the totality of all these things? Please think about it. If your answer is no, I don't want that kind of society, then fight like hell every inch of the way.